Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Congressman John Yarmuth.
Good morning and thank you. I appreciate, first of all, the structure, the purpose of this conference, and also allowing you to put it on my farewell tour. Washington's an interesting place, and just this week we realized that in D.C., getting bitten by a fox doesn't just mean that you've been skewered by Tucker Carlson. It means you've actually been bitten by a fox. Happened to one of my colleagues the other day. In 9 months, I will be retiring from Congress after 16 years, and I can say without hesitation that the world has changed more dramatically in those 16 years than in any similar period in the history of our civilization. Remember, the iPhone was introduced in 2007. So was Facebook. Sounds unbelievable. But one of the benefits of becoming a political lame duck, perhaps the only one other than not having to ask anyone for money, is that you don't worry about saying something that could cost you an election. Now, I don't think I've pulled many punches during my 16 years in Congress, but I've said pretty much what I wanted to say and been happy to defend the positions that I took that were controversial. But there's some things I wanted to say that I thought were best left unsaid. I'm now ready to say them, and that's what I'm going to do today. Not all of them, but some of them. I came to Congress in 2007, full of ambition and conviction, and ready to change the world, just like every new member of Congress does. I was 59 years old and not naive, but I still deeply believe that our democracy and our system of government were the models for the world, and that our government on balance would and could make life better for our citizens. After almost 16 years, I no longer believe that. In fact, I'm more fearful than ever that the unprecedented experiment we began in 1776 is on the verge of failure. While we have experienced incredible technological changes since 2006 when I was elected, Uber and Twitter and artificial intelligence and self-driving cars, things that have arguably improved our lives, although arguably is certainly true of Twitter. One thing has changed more than at any time in the 240-year history of the United States, and that is the infrastructure of our democracy. Quite simply, just as our roads and bridges and water systems have deteriorated from overuse and neglect and disinvestment, the institutions of our democracy, and most importantly, the human infrastructure that is the foundation of any successful democracy, has deteriorated, possibly beyond repair. Before I came to Congress, I was a journalist. I was not just a beneficiary of the First Amendment guarantee of a free press, I was an apostle of the Jeffersonian notion that a free press is essential to the functioning of a free democracy. After all, how can a democracy work if the citizens who form the government do not have their do not have the information they need to make an intelligent decision about who their elected representatives will be and the policies that will govern their lives? Now, I'm not going to expand on the press today because that would take an entire separate speech, but just to say the press is failing our democracy, and it is part of our democracy, part of that infrastructure I'm talking about. Anyway, 16 years since I was elected, I have to say that my lifetime belief in American democracy has been shattered like a kid who has just realized there's no Santa. I haven't given up on our democracy, and I won't, but I'm haunted by something my friend and colleague David Obey, a 42-year member of the House of Representatives, said to me a few years ago. He said, "You know, John, democracy does not guarantee a happy ending." I'm going to do as much as I can today to avoid partisan statements, but in today's environment, you inevitably fail doing that, because the non-fake news is that one of our country's political parties has become both anti-truth and anti-democratic. But here is where I will say the unsayable. It's not necessarily the Republicans' fault. It's the fault of our decaying political infrastructure in which too many American citizens, the classic we the people, are both unwilling and ill-equipped to meet their responsibilities as citizens in a democracy. That doesn't apply to anybody here, of course, promise. And what is our political infrastructure? Of course, it's the US Congress and our state legislatures and our metro councils and our courts and our school boards. Anyone who has taken a civics course knows that. Of course, that means only people over 60 know it, because nobody's taken civics in many years. But our democracy infrastructure depends on the education of our citizens as to what our system of government is and how it works. It depends on our media to keep citizens informed about public policy and the real-world implications of their choices. But first and foremost, it depends on people understanding their role in making our government function and doing the work to perform that role with whatever intellect and resources they have. They have to pay attention, and they have to be willing to hold public officials accountable. And that, I believe, is one of the biggest problems we have in this country today. Politicians can get away with most everything. But there's a more fundamental problem. We have to have people get a better sense of connecting the dots between their government and their lives. I'll never forget back in 2009 when we were debating the Affordable Care Act, and a young couple came to my office to talk to me. They were there for the protest against doing it. They were teachers in Jefferson County Public Schools in their mid-30s. And one of the first things they came to me to say to me about why they didn't want the ACA passed was, we don't want the government to get involved in our health care. So I was trying not to be patronizing or condescending. So I said to them, well, you understand that your health care is paid for by the government. And then they said, and these are teachers, so they're college graduates, and they said, no, Humana pays for our health care. I said, no, actually, the Commonwealth of Kentucky pays for your health care. The taxpayers do. And it occurred to me that the thought that they were actually public employees would have never occurred to them. It was just an incredible example of a disconnect. And you've all heard the stories about people who say, keep the government out of my Medicare. That's real. I heard it time after time after time. People, in many cases, don't understand what a government program actually is. I ask questions now like, how is it possible that more than 40% of American people today believe we have lost jobs during the Biden administration, when in fact we have gained more jobs, created more jobs than any comparable period in the history of the country? How is that possible? How is it possible that people still believe that climate change is fake when their towns and communities are being ravaged by tornadoes and floods, and we have huge pieces of the Antarctic ice shelf breaking off, the size of states? How is it possible that they don't know that? How is it possible that 60% of Republicans still believe that Donald Trump won the 2020 election? How is that possible? And what does that mean for all of us? I heard Mitch McConnell yesterday was doing an interview with Axios, and the interviewer, Jonathan Swan, asked him if after the midterms, Joe Biden gets another Supreme Court position to nominate, to fill, and the Republicans were in control, would they allow a vote on it? And Mitch McConnell said, I'm not going to answer that question. Now, Mitch does that a lot, and he's done it a lot through his however many years, 38 years, I believe, in the Senate. But he can get away with it because people don't hold him accountable. People don't hold me accountable. People say, as you know, I hate Congress. 20% approval rating, maybe. I hate Congress, but I love my congressman. People have to start holding their congressmen and women accountable, even if they like them. There was a book a few years ago by Thomas Frank called What's the Matter with Kansas? And liberals loved it because it was all about how people would vote conservative, even though the liberal policies would actually help them. They voted against their selfish interests. Well, what Thomas Frank tried to write about but really didn't understand is that most people don't know what the liberal agenda is. Of course, anything Democrats do today is a socialist agenda, but they don't understand how those policies are made and how they affect their lives, except for taxes and now gas prices. In today's Alice in Wonderland world, politicians can successfully take credit for things they voted against. We're seeing that now with American Rescue Plan projects. And they get blamed for things they couldn't possibly do anything about, like Joe Biden and rising gas prices. There's a famous saying in a democracy, saying that in a democracy, we get the government we deserve. American citizens need to take a long look in the mirror and hold themselves responsible for the admittedly dysfunctional government at virtually every level that we are justifiably complaining about. So with that, thank you for letting me get that off my chest, and I will retire into the darkness. Thanks very much.